Warning, this video contains spoilers for the entire Legacy of Kain series. There we go! How are you all doing, and welcome to YindyPlayZ, the post for halfwits stream. Of course, we could not ignore the fact that Legacy of Kain dropped this week. One of my absolute all-time favourite, both games, narratives, pieces of media, and it's been given the remaster treatment. And that's important for later on. However, to give you a little bit of a background on my particular relationship with Legacy of Kain, growing up very much I was fascinated with Raziel, which, let's be fair, to a 11, 12-year-old was the epitome of an edgelord, with the kind of emo-ish sort of hair, the fact that the scarf was up over the face, the claws, the sort of mysterious nature. That's the sort of thing that you think's really cool at 11, 12. So superficially, it drew me in. However, I did not play Soul Reaver 1 or Blood Omen 1 first. I started, and my very first introduction to the Legacy of Kain was in fact Soul Reaver 2, and quickly, in the first cutscene, and we will be playing Soul Reaver 2 tonight, Soul Reaver 1, it is objectively the better video game. As in, its mechanics tie in with its storytelling. It's very much that Ludo narrative sort of cohesion, to use big fancy scholarly words. But having said all that, to me, it very much still is a product of its time, in that Soul Reaver 1 is set up like a PS1 game. Kain's the villain. He's set up the entire time. We're trying to get to Kain, and in order to get to him, we have to go through a boss rush of Raziel and his 5 brothers. 4, because one got cut to budget reasons and shows up in a later game. But even then, going through the levels, you have to solve puzzles, traps, different sort of elaborate devices. If there's a game that explored pushing block tiles about, it was Soul Reaver. However, a lot got cut with Soul Reaver, including the ending, which is both a blessing and a curse, because it's a curse in the sense you literally get up to Kain and it's clear they ran out of budget and very abruptly cut to be continued. However, the good side of that is they spun that to be continued off into Soul Reaver 2. Soul Reaver 2 kind of has done away with the boss structure. There is still puzzles, there's still the temples and riddles and things that you need to solve, but those parts kind of feel a little bit at odds with the rest of the game, like Soul Reaver 2 suddenly jolts up awake and goes, holy shit, I'm a video game. Yeah, here's a Tomb Raider style section for you. And yes, it still tries to tell bits of the story through the murals and stuff of the ancient vampires. But that's not what makes Soul Reaver 2 great. The thing that makes Soul Reaver 2 great is the Shakespearean level dialogue. From the very opening cutscenes, the writing, the dialogue, the character interaction, you do not need to play Soul Reaver 1, in my opinion, to enjoy Soul Reaver 2. At great danger of just gushing about Soul Reaver 2 for the next 2 hours, which I will probably be doing anyway. We probably should get to some actual gameplay. We are playing the remastered, and I will be flicking back and forth between some of the scenes and give you my real-time interactions of what I think of the graphics. I do love Raziel's new look.
If you'd prefer,
Not sure about Mobius though.
Well, this is completely unexpected, but you must.
I feel the old one had a bit more character to his face. So yes, absolutely love everything about that. It gets you right up to speed on everything in Soul Reaver 1. It hints at the relationship between Raziel and Kain, but also that of Kain and Mobius, and now Raziel and Mobius. Absolutely great stuff. I also love how they've added the button that lets us flick between the old and the new style graphics. Personally, Soul Reaver 1 absolutely did need a graphical overhaul. Soul Reaver 2, on the other hand, I feel the old graphics were much more expressive, but this is me talking with inch-thick nostalgia goggles on. Having said all that, I always thought that the Soul Reaver 2 character model of Raziel looked a little bit like a blue Michael Jackson. I don't know, is that just me? The combat does feel a little bit different from the original. So I can see why people with the Silent Hill remake thought that the old style graphics added much more kind of atmosphere. And that's very much how I feel about Soul Reaver 2. Personally, I like the Silent Hill 2 remake. And I did like the kind of graphical overhaul. Although if there's one thing that particular... Oh, okay. Someone's very eager to get with me. He's clipping through the door. That's new. Hello. Don't mind me. Just walk straight past. So again, combat was never the strong focus of the Soul Reaver games. It was functional. Another little great design choice I love is Raziel starts off at full power at the beginning of Soul Reaver 2 with all the upgrades and abilities that you got in Soul Reaver 1. So it makes sense. Again, spoiler for Defiance. I think it was probably the most epic moment of that game where it turns out that Janos Ordrin's heart was what was used to make Kain, because Kain wasn't turned by another vampire, he was raised by the Necromancer Mortanius. And I love that. I absolutely loved that. I remember audibly gasping whenever when I saw that scene for the first time. And then the line where Kain shows up later on and just goes, well, I always was considered heartless. And I was just like, boom, that's right up there with Yippee-ki-yay, in terms of like the best one-liners in media history. But I love how when Silicon Knights developed Blood Omen, that wasn't a thing that they had planned out. That was again the legendary Amy Hennig coming in and being able to take the narrative from Blood Omen. Again, the whole thing with William and changing history that we were just talking about. Also, I have gone back and tested and can say for 100% certainty in fact, you can kill William not using the Reaver. Quick thing, obviously time loops are a major thing in Legacy of Kain, and this room, the Ouroboros, the constant repeating time cycle. But I love that if you shift, it shows a part that breaks off. And that's major foreshadowing for later. I love how in Defiance, again, they work it into the story that Raziel can no longer use the portals to come back to the material world. So he basically just has to hijack corpses and alien chest burst his way out of them. It doesn't make much sense when you think about it, but it is cool. But yes, in terms of like the constant repeating timelines, like I said, there's 3 established timelines in the Legacy of Kain games. I would like to see a timeline where when Raziel had the Reaper there with Mobius, decides to just fucking kill him. Because that would have major story ramifications.
Stormy.
A little bit of good narrative justification there for the fact that you cannot game over in Soul Reaver 2. If you die in the Spectral Realm, again in the story, Raziel's soul just gets pushed back to one of those beacons. And you heal up in the Spectral Realm while simultaneously depleting your health in the normal realm. Okay. I don't want to be staring at Raziel's ass, thank you very much. Yeah, underwater controls are a bit jank. But yeah, when I was a kid, I absolutely binged Soul Reaver 2. I think it took me less than 40 hours to complete shadowing. It does. But yeah, I remember discussing Soul Reaver in my old techie class. And one of the other guys I used to hang around with got really frustrated at Soul Reaver 2, saying that the puzzles were actually just too hard. And I think it took him... He'd been playing it for about 2 months and still hadn't beaten the game. I definitely think out of the two of them, Soul Reaver 1 is definitely the harder game. So, in moment-to-moment gameplay, and this is what I mean about Soul Reaver 2 being the weaker video game, it really is just running along linear corridors until you get to one of the puzzle box dungeons. So yeah, after Defiance, the next game was meant to be Legacy of Kain Dark Sun, featuring a brand new character. And I don't think Kain featured at all, really, in Dark Sun. Now, at first I was like, how can you have a Legacy of Kain game without either Kain or Raziel? That's sacrilege, surely. The Legacy of Kain, it bears his name, for God's sake. But I remember seeing test footage of it. I'm just going to pause before we trigger the next epic cutscene. Thinking back on it, I would have loved to see what they would have done with the new character who inherits the mantle of and becomes a wraith like Raziel and actually becomes the new Soul Reaver, and where they were going to go with that. And at some point they would have to tie it back in with Kain. So, as much as I loved the intro sequence with Kain, Raziel, that boss fight at the end of Soul Reaver 1 / beginning of Soul Reaver 2, this is probably my second, if not tied for first place, favourite cutscene. And this is the real test of the game for me. How does the new in-game model of Kain hold up? Let's find out.
Destinies. Stay out of his net, Raziel. Spare me your elaborate...
Yeah, still prefer the original.
And whose will is satisfied then? The will of Raziel or Mobius? Suppose you throw a coin enough times. Suppose one day it lands on its edge.
Again, masterful. And to keep this kind of in context, if you played through Soul Reaver 1 first, Kain's obviously the big boss at the end. You do sort of fight him in a gimmicky boss fight. He does blue ball you by going "to be continued, Raziel," and buggers off through the time chamber. So this would have been the big combination of the big major boss fight with Kain. And Soul Reaver 2 goes, nah, not doing it. No, we're going to have an existential philosophical discussion, and then Kain just buggers off, and Raziel's like, okay. And that's the complete shift in focus from Soul Reaver. So yeah, so Raziel was the first to spawn wings and therefore evolve past Kain. Yet Kain never changes after that, and all his brothers continue to evolve. And I love how no one questioned that.
My arrival.
I do feel the camera hugs Raziel a little bit too closely.
Remember your rage, Raziel. Let it guide your hand.
Again, another fantastic character scene. The Elder God, played by Tony J, being very much the mentor, traditional mentor character for Raziel in Soul Reaver 1. There was always a hint of antagonism between them. He was clearly not altruistic, but this cutscene is the moment the relationship turns, when Raziel is free of him. And there's so many great periods in the Legacy of Kain series that they could set a new game. That I'd love to see Kain's empire when Raziel and his brothers were in charge. What did that look like? I know we got that questionable multiplayer game set during that time, but how both Vampire Society worked before Kain and during his empire. So there's no experience system or upgrades that you spend souls on or anything. You upgrade Raziel by completing puzzles and when the story dictates that Raziel gets stronger. So there's very little reason to fight when you don't have to. I keep expecting a slightly more fluid, modern Dark Souls kind of combat system with parries and blocks and all that kind of good stuff. And you'll sense the shift now. Right up to this point, it's been very dialogue heavy. A lot of character interaction, great stuff. Now it remembers it's a video game. As I said at the beginning of the stream, I genuinely do think Soul Reaver 2 could be adapted into a non-interactive medium and lose nothing. Soul Reaver 1, not so much because the mechanics are tied to the story. Now they try and weave some of the story into the dungeons, but this is very much tell, don't show. Raziel looking at the murals and deciphering it for you. If you were doing this for TV or a stage play, you wouldn't have a one-to-one faithful adaptation of Raziel jumping along, solving Tomb Raider style puzzles for half an hour to an hour. I feel you would have a point of view ancient vampire character and you would flash back and tell those stories from their perspective and then cut back to Raziel looking at the mural. Another big difference between Soul Reaver 1 and 2. There was obviously a lot of cut content in Soul Reaver 1. And a lot, like the magic system and things like that. And the world's surprisingly open. And there's loads of secret areas and loads of secret mechanics that you can engage in. Soul Reaver 2, not so much. Part of me really hopes someday they do a full remake of the Legacy of Kain series. But the problem is, the actors are getting really old. They were old when they did the voices for these games. I'm pretty sure Simon Templeman's in his 70s and Michael Bell, Raziel, must be in his 80s by now. We've lost Tony J with his distinctive voice. He was also Megabyte in the original Reboot series. So could you do a remake but use the original voice files? Or you would have to say, hey look, this is a remake. The original actors are either too old or dead. And have to try and find new actors with the same gravitas, which would piss off a lot of people, but really go a different direction with them. Which could be divisive, but I feel that's the only way to say, hey look, we don't want to try and redo Simon Templeman, Michael Bell and Tony J. So we're going to have to go in a completely new direction. They did do a Lara Croft, that isometric Guardian of Light game, where they released a pack where instead of Lara Croft and random guy that she was with, you play as Kain and Raziel, because it was off the Crystal Dynamics. And I bought that game and that pack solely to play as Kain and Raziel, thinking this game is going to be amazing and give more epic Soul Reaver 2 level dialogue and interactions between Kain and Raziel. I was bitterly disappointed. Instead, all they did was chop lines from the various Soul Reaver and Defiance games and remix them. Completely out of context. Now, as a kid, none of these puzzles stumped me. And as much as my pride is hurt here, I feel I'm going to have to look this up because I want to at least get to the Vorador scene. This really hurts that I need to look this up. Ah, right. I've got it. I've got it. Stupid me. Hold X to grab. Now it makes sense. Yep, yep. And that creates a pillar of darkness. I remember it now. It's all coming back. Oh, I feel dumb. Probably my other favourite cutscene for Soul Reaver 2 is towards the end where Kain shows up to Raziel and Raziel's just tired. And he turns to Kain and he goes, you again. I don't feel I have the stomach for this conversation. And Kain just goes, now, Raziel, it's fine. There's nothing dramatic happening this time. I just want to talk. And I love the progression of their relationship from the PS1 game where Kain villain, Kain bad, he bad boss, go kill him, to this much more nuanced relationship. So yeah, Soul Reaver 2 is not a long game. And it's roughly in 3 sections. So the first one is, if you like, present day, the middle point. So you would go, you would defeat or beat the Light Reaver chamber, get that unlocked. You fight your way back into the Sarfa Stronghold. Mobius dicks you over and Raziel asks to be sent back into the past to speak to Janos. But instead, Mobius propels him into the future. You get a few more Reaver upgrades, but the rest of the game is then Raziel trying to get the necessary upgrades to work the time streaming chamber for himself to then get to the future, have his conversation with Janos, and then that sets up and kicks off the events of Defiance. So, we will leave Soul Reaver 2 there. It is one of my all-time favourite games, and if you've not played it, highly recommend you do so. It's quite short. As I said, 11-year-old me binged it in less than 48 hours. Definitely play Soul Reaver 1 as well for the experience, but I think it's Soul Reaver 2 that'll stick with you. I hope you had a chance to check out this week's episode of 4 Halfwits. But with that, I will absolutely bid you adieu there just now. Thank you if you did join in at any point, and I will see you next week. Thanks again, guys. Catch you later. Yindy.